There it was, right in the middle of the store. A full-blown, lying on the floor, legs kicking, voice reaching levels you didn't know were human kind of meltdown. And of course, every single adult within a 10-meter radius suddenly became a silent judge. Now, if you've ever stood there holding a basket in one hand and your patience in the other, barely, you've probably asked yourself the same question most parents won't say out loud. Is this normal, or am I completely failing at this parenting thing? Because let's be honest, tantrums have a way of making even the most confident adult feel like they've missed some secret manual everyone else got. But here's the part most people don't tell you, and frankly, should. Tantrums are not just normal, they're expected, predictable even. In fact, if you understand what's really going on inside that tiny, overwhelmed brain, the whole scene starts to look a lot less like bad behavior and a lot more like something else entirely. Something far more human. Now, the real question isn't how do you stop tantrums? It's why are they happening in the first place? You see, when a child is in the middle of a tantrum, what you're looking at is not strategy, it's circuitry. Raw, unfiltered, underdeveloped circuitry. Let me explain it the way I wish someone had explained it years ago. Inside every child's brain, there are two systems constantly trying to work together. One is the emotional center, the fast, reactive, I feel it, so I act on it immediately part. That system, fully online from very early on. No delays, no hesitation, no mercy. The other system is the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for logic, impulse control, decision making, and that very adult ability to say, I'm upset, but maybe I shouldn't scream in a supermarket. Now, here's the problem. In children, that second system is still under construction. Not slightly unfinished. No, we're talking scaffolding, exposed wires, the whole situation. It won't be fully developed for years. So, when something small happens, like being told no or having to leave a fun activity, the emotional brain fires instantly. Big feelings, fast. And there's no reliable brake system yet to regulate it. That's where what psychologists call emotional flooding comes in. It's that moment when feelings hit so intensely, the child literally cannot process or manage them. Imagine being overwhelmed, frustrated, tired, and misunderstood, but without the vocabulary, self control, or coping tools to deal with any of it. Now remove your adult filter. No deep breaths, no walking away, no internal voice saying, calm down. What would happen? Exactly. That explosion you're seeing, the kicking, screaming, crying, it's not a calculated move. It's a nervous system overload. The brain has essentially gone offline in the reasoning department, and the emotional system has taken full control. And here's where many adults get it wrong. We look at a tantrum and assume intention, manipulation. They're doing this to get their way. But in most cases, the child isn't thinking that far ahead. They're not running a strategy, they're reacting to a storm they don't know how to control. In fact, expecting a child in that state to just calm down is a bit like expecting someone to solve a math problem while their house is on fire. The tools needed simply aren't accessible in that moment. And once you understand that, something shifts. Because now, instead of asking, how do I stop this behavior? You start asking a much more useful question. What triggered this overload in the first place? Now, here's where things get interesting. Because most tantrums don't start where you think they do. Oh, it looks like it started because you said no to sweets, or because you turned off the TV, or because you dared, how very bold of you, to suggest bedtime. But that's usually just the spark, not the fire. The real triggers, they've been building quietly long before that moment. I've watched it happen more times than I can count. A child wakes up a little off. Maybe they didn't sleep well. Then breakfast is rushed. Then there's noise, movement, people talking, things happening too fast. By midday, their system is already stretched thin. And then you say, no, you can't have that. and boom, explosion. Not because of the no, but because that no was the final straw. Children, especially younger ones, operate on a very limited emotional bandwidth. Hunger, fatigue, overstimulation, these aren't small inconveniences to them. They are full body experiences. Their tolerance threshold is low, and once it's crossed, the reaction looks dramatic. Then there's frustration, the kind that comes from not being able to fully express what they want. Imagine knowing exactly what you feel, but not having the words, the clarity, or even the patience to communicate it properly. That gap between feeling and expression, that's where tantrums love to live. You'll hear a child cry over something that sounds trivial, but underneath it is often a very real struggle. I can't make you understand me. And then comes one of the biggest triggers parents underestimate: lack of control. Children are in a world where almost everything is decided for them: when to eat, what to wear, where to go, when to stop playing. For an adult, that might feel structured. For a child, it can feel like constant restriction. So when they finally push back, when they insist, resist, or melt down, it's often their way of reclaiming some sense of autonomy. Not gracefully, of course, but very loudly. And transitions. Oh, transitions are a classic setup. Moving from something enjoyable to something less exciting, like playtime to bedtime, requires a level of emotional adjustment that many children simply don't have yet. To them, it feels abrupt, unfair even. What makes it trickier is that adults tend to focus on the visible trigger. They're crying because I took the toy. But the experienced eye sees differently. It's rarely about the toy, it's about the buildup, the state they were already in, the invisible layers stacking quietly until something finally tips the scale. Once you start noticing patterns, time of day, environment, routines, you begin to predict these moments before they happen. And that's when parenting stops feeling like firefighting and starts feeling a little more like strategy. Because the real leverage isn't in reacting to tantrums, it's in understanding what feeds them. Now, let me tell you where most well meaning adults accidentally pour fuel on the fire and then wonder why the flames got taller. It usually starts with urgency. You're tired, you're in public, people are watching, and that small voice in your head says, "Shut this down, quickly." So you react. You raise your voice, you threaten consequences, or, on the other end of the spectrum, you give in just to make it stop. Fine, take it, just stop crying. In that moment, it feels like control, but what you're actually creating is a pattern. You see, children are exceptional pattern detectors. They don't need lectures or long explanations. They learn through outcomes. If a tantrum leads to a reward, even occasionally, the brain logs it. This works. Not consciously, not manipulatively, just efficiently. That's basic behavioral reinforcement. Now flip the scenario. You respond with anger. You shout, maybe even escalate emotionally. What happens next? The child doesn't calm down. They go higher. Because here's the part most people overlook: children mirror emotional intensity. If you bring heat, they bring more heat. Not out of defiance, but because their nervous system is already dysregulated, and now it's syncing with yours. So instead of one overwhelmed brain in the room, now you have two, and that never ends well. Then there's inconsistency, the quiet saboteur of discipline. One day, the tantrum gets ignored. The next day, it gets rewarded. Another day, it gets punished. From the child's perspective, the rules are unclear. And when rules are unclear, behavior becomes louder, not calmer. Why? Because the brain keeps testing. If I try harder, will it work this time? And that's how tantrums escalate. Not because children are becoming more difficult, but because the system around them is unpredictable. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, without realizing it, adults train the very behavior they're trying to stop, not intentionally, just reactively. The goal isn't to dominate the moment, it's to stabilize it. Because control, real control, doesn't come from being louder, stricter, or quicker to react. It comes from something far less dramatic and far more effective: knowing how to respond without becoming part of the chaos. Now, this is the part most people are hoping for: the what do I actually do when it happens part. And I'll be honest with you, it's not flashy. It won't make you look like a superhero in the middle of a grocery aisle, but it works. First thing, your calm is not optional, it's the anchor. When a child is overwhelmed, their nervous system is looking, whether they realize it or not, for something stable to attach to. If you stay steady, you become that reference point. If you escalate, you remove the only stability in the room. Now, calm doesn't mean passive. It doesn't mean you ignore everything and pretend you've achieved enlightenment. It means controlled, intentional behavior. Lower your voice, slow your movements, reduce stimulation. Then acknowledge the feeling, not the behavior. There's a difference between saying, I can see you're really upset, and saying, fine, do whatever you want. One validates emotion, the other rewards the meltdown. Children don't need their behavior approved, they need their feelings understood. And here's where timing becomes critical. During a tantrum, logic is useless. You can give the most brilliant explanation known to mankind, and it will bounce right off. The brain simply isn't in a state to process it. So you keep it simple: few words, clear presence. I'm here. I understand you're upset. We'll talk when you're calm. That's it. No lectures, no debates. Once the storm passes, and it always does, that's when the teaching happens. You revisit the situation. You help them label what they felt: frustration, anger, disappointment. You give them language, because language is one of the tools that slowly replaces tantrums over time. And then, this is the part many skip: you reinforce the boundary, calmly, consistently. I understand you wanted that, but the answer is still no. That combination, empathy plus firmness, is where real progress lives. Now imagine two versions of the same moment. In one, the adult reacts emotionally, gives in halfway, and ends the scene quickly. Peaceful? Yes. Effective? Not at all. In the other, the adult stays composed, allows the emotion without rewarding the behavior, and holds the boundary. It takes longer, it's less comfortable, but over time, the intensity drops, the frequency reduces, the child learns. Because consistency teaches what words alone cannot. And slowly, very slowly, that chaotic, floor kicking meltdown turns into something else entirely: a child who still feels deeply, but now knows what to do with those feelings. Now, as much as I'd love to tell you every tantrum falls neatly into this perfectly normal part of growing up box, that wouldn't be entirely honest. Most do, but not all. There comes a point where you stop asking, is this just a phase? And start asking, is something else going on here? And the difference usually shows up in three areas: frequency, intensity, and duration. If a child is having occasional meltdowns tied to clear triggers like fatigue or frustration, that's development doing its job. Messy, loud, inconvenient, but normal. But if tantrums are happening constantly across different settings with no clear pattern, that's worth paying attention to. Then there's intensity. We're not talking about crying, shouting, or dramatic flopping on the floor. We're talking about reactions that seem disproportionate even for a child: extreme aggression, repeated attempts to hurt others or themselves, or an inability to come down from that emotional peak without significant intervention. That's no longer just big feelings. That's a nervous system struggling at a different level. And duration, that's the one many overlook. A typical tantrum burns out. It spikes, it peaks, and eventually the child settles, especially with consistent, calm handling. But when a meltdown stretches on and on, or happens multiple times back to back without recovery, it may signal something deeper. Now, this doesn't mean you panic. It doesn't mean you start diagnosing your child over one bad week. It means you observe. You look for patterns. You take note of what's happening before, during, and after these episodes. Because sometimes persistent or extreme tantrums can be linked to developmental differences, sensory processing challenges, or emotional regulation difficulties that need a different kind of support. And here's the important part: getting help is not failure, it's precision. Just like you wouldn't ignore a physical symptom that keeps repeating, you don't ignore emotional patterns that don't follow typical development. The goal isn't to label a child, it's to understand them better. Because once you understand what you're really dealing with, you stop guessing and you start responding in a way that actually helps. And in most cases, with the right support, the right structure, and the right approach, things improve gradually, steadily, realistically. Because even when tantrums step outside the normal range, there's still communication, just a louder, more urgent kind. So, after all that noise, all that drama, all those moments that make you question your sanity in public places, here's the truth most people don't say clearly enough. Tantrums are not a sign that something is wrong with your child, they're a sign that something is still developing. That shift alone changes everything because now, instead of seeing a problem to shut down, you start seeing a skill that hasn't formed yet: emotional regulation. And your role quietly changes from enforcer to coach. Not a perfect coach, by the way. No one's handing out trophies for keeping calm while someone screams at full volume over the wrong cup color, but a consistent one, a steady one. And that's what children grow into. So, if you've had those moments, the stares, the embarrassment, the internal, what am I doing wrong? You're not alone. You're just in the middle of a very human phase of development. Now I'm curious, what's the most unforgettable tantrum you've witnessed or handled? Drop it in the comments. I read more of them than you think. And yes, I do respond. If this helped you see things a little clearer, go ahead and like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. There's a lot more we need to talk about.